Give me an A, and I'll show you something so unforgettable it'll leave you breathless. A question for teachers: have students ever offered you intimacy in exchange for passing an exam or getting a good grade? If so, how did you react, and what were the further consequences for them? This is a fairly common phenomenon and happens at least once or twice a semester. I think it's not entirely a way to improve grades, but rather the only way they can think of to act on their passion. Often, those who make such offers are already excellent students. I also agree with other teachers that for female students, this attraction is not physical. I'm about 40 years old but look much older, but rather intellectual. In cases where a female student clearly tries to trade a good grade for intimacy, I always find it quite offensive. Seriously, do you think you're the best I could get? In some of these cases, I suspect they just hope that flirting will help them get a good grade without having to go all the way. In any case, I usually just pretend not to notice when they say something like the classic, "I'll do anything, and I really mean anything, to pass the exam." I respond with something like, "Good, because that will require many hours in the library reading, or you'll really have to write a very good essay to pass the exam." For most of them, that's enough, and they don't cross the line. Although, from time to time, some are genuinely aggressive. When that happens, I try never to be alone with them. I have my student assistants interrupt us at regular intervals and so on, so they can't make any moves. However, I had one particularly persistent female student many years ago who wouldn't be deterred. If there wasn't a table between us, her hand would immediately go up my thigh. If there was a table, the moment I turned away, she'd move closer to me. One time, I literally climbed onto the table to get away from her and loudly protested, "I'm married." Her response was, "So what? Does your wife have something I don't?" My reply, a higher education. My first job was at a trade college in Ecuador. One student failed an exam, like most others. I scheduled a retake during my free time, then gave them another chance. In the end, this guy was the only student who failed. I submitted the grade sheet and went to a bar to celebrate finishing work on the Galapagos Islands, as I was leaving the next day. Guess who showed up? This guy bought me a drink, which I drank before realizing who it was from. Then he approached me to ask me to change his grade. At that point, it was impossible. He offered me substances, kept buying me drinks, which I didn't drink. After a couple of hours, he left. I felt such relief because I was even physically scared of him. He came back with a hotel room key, told me to cross the street and hook up with his girlfriend. She was sitting next to him and didn't react at all. He pulled off her shirt in the dirty bar, and she still didn't respond, sitting there indifferently. Then he convinced a few regulars at the bar to approach and pressure me to accept the offer. I was utterly horrified, barely able to utter a word. I don't really remember how I got out of there. Some locals saw the situation, escorted me to a taxi home, and to this day, when I return to that city, I'm afraid of running into that guy. I teach mathematics at a large university in the USA. I have female students who flirt or make subtle hints quite regularly. But one of them went too far. She was struggling in my subject, with an average of about 65% at the start of the semester. But she constantly came to my office for help. She was really trying, but the material was still tough for her. I genuinely wanted her to succeed because it was clear she was willing to work, so I didn't mind the extra sessions. She was a very attractive young woman and always came to my classes in tight or revealing clothing, but that's how she always dressed, so I didn't suspect anything. In fact, she barely flirted, though occasionally she'd lightly touch my hand. I kept my office door open, with a busy hallway nearby, so I wasn't really worried about it. Toward the end of the semester, she came to my office and asked if she could charge her phone. She said she didn't have a charger but had a cable and could plug it into my laptop. I didn't think much of it and said, "Sure." She became quite flirtatious during that meeting and started crossing personal space boundaries, but I played dumb and focused on the academics. When we finished, she unplugged her phone and said something like, "I think my phone copied some photos onto your computer. Tell me what you think of them." Oh my God, had she sent me some photos? There were literally hundreds of her photos, taken throughout the semester, almost all of them nude. I'd be lying if I said I didn't stare at them that night before deleting them. I'm only human. I should have reported it to the administration, but I didn't. We met, and she was embarrassed, but we stuck to the line that it was probably a complete accident. Surprisingly, she didn't drop my course. Instead, she apologized after the next class, very embarrassed, and promised it wouldn't happen again. I continued allowing her to come during office hours for help, but we sat in a common room, not my office. And just to be clear, she was 20 years old, not underage. I used to teach astronomy at a college, which required students to go to the campus observatory for 2 hours once a week, weather permitting, to study constellations and look through the telescope. One girl in my class was very smart but didn't like to work hard, so she always sat with nerdy, awkward guys who found studying easy. She was attractive enough and flirted with them to get them to do most of her work for her. Having been in their position in college, I quickly figured out what was going on. One day, she asked me if the observatory would be open, to which I replied, I don't know, because it was the middle of the day. Then she sighed and said, maybe we could meet up tonight, go to the movies, and figure out my grade some other way. Being the polite physics grad student that I am, I just stared at her blankly, turned, and quickly walked to the other end of the office. As I left, I heard the guys at the table planning to bring food and movies since they thought it was an open invitation. I have no idea what that was about. I taught for several semesters at a fairly large university. My groups ranged from 30 to 70 students. In a group of 70 students, one girl who was doing terribly tried something similar. To this day, I can't understand how she even got into the university. She couldn't even write a proper sentence. During a 3-hour break, she came up to my podium to discuss her grades. She was consistently getting solid Fs. She said, I want to know how I can improve my grade, and immediately leaned in, supposedly to look at the computer screen, but at the same time placed her breasts on my arm like an eagle on a perch, smiling. This was in front of 70 people. I pulled away and told her that her grades required a lot of work and she should go to a tutor. I went straight to the grad student lab and wrote a letter to the program director detailing what had just happened. To hell with it, she wasn't even good at offering intimacy for a grade. She was just hopeless. When I was teaching a freshman course in grad school, one girl offered me intimacy in exchange for a passing grade. We had a strict but very reasonable attendance policy. As a rule, if you didn't show up to at least half of the lab sessions, you automatically failed the lab course. This girl had missed more than half of the sessions without valid reasons. Toward the end of the semester, her behavior became strange and inconsistent. She'd ask to meet with me but would back out if she found out we wouldn't be alone during the office hours of other lab sessions I was teaching, and so on. She kept asking for a meeting to discuss her grade. So, in the end, I offered to meet her 15 minutes after my second-to-last class in the last week of the semester, meaning I had to work 2 more hours until the semester ended. I also asked my boss and another female colleague to be there. Long story short, she showed up to the meeting we'd agreed on, asking what she needed to do for the lab. Isn't there anything else I can do, she said, giving me a suggestive look. I replied that she could come to the lab and complete the assignment the next day. Her response was priceless. She said she couldn't come to the lab because she was going to some sorority event and repeated her question about what she could do. That's just awful. If you're going to prioritize having fun over passing an exam, why should I go out of my way to help you pass? So, I told her there was nothing I could do. She asked if there was anything else she could do to improve her grade a third time, using that phrase, looking young. Another grad student told her to get lost. And here's the funniest part, as soon as she left, she wrote to my boss she didn't know he was in the room and asked to meet with him to discuss her grade. He explained there was nothing to discuss and that she had royally screwed up. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new, super interesting discussions. Become our patron via the link in the description and listen to our episodes in the background without ads or censorship. In the meantime, we suggest checking out our other videos.